everyone, it is Haley here, also known as Gabrielle for the Facebook folks, and today we will be continuing our series on God's generals, and so the spotlight will be on Lester Sumrall today. And as always, this is coming mainly from the Healing and Revival website. So we will jump right in. Lester Frank Sumrall was born February 15th, 1913 in New Orleans, Louisiana, to George and Betty Sumrall. His mother was a strong Christian, but his father was lukewarm in his faith. His mother committed him to God before Lester was born and prayed that he would become a preacher. He was born the sixth child of what would eventually be a family of 8 children. Betty would invite itinerant evangelists to stay in their home while meetings were being held in their church. This would often mean an extra family to feed and house, and Lester didn't like the stress that it added to the household. He decided he didn't like evangelists and certainly never wanted to be one. Oh my! Betty Sumrall was an incredible prayer warrior and prayed for her family constantly. That's awesome. Lester saw some very miraculous events in their lives. One day, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. She surrounded herself with women who would pray for her on a regular basis. During the night, in the midst of this battle, Jesus came into her room and touched her. She was healed from that time on. All right. When Lester's grandfather had a stroke, he became incapacitated. He could not feed or clothe himself. The family brought him into their home, and Betty decided to get the women's prayer group to pray for him. They led him to Christ and began to pray. He was in a wheelchair and could not move his legs or arms. The power of God came upon him, and he got up out of the wheelchair and could walk and move his arms. He returned home to live 15 more years on his own. Wow. So what is that, like Hezekiah, I think in the Old Testament, who lived 15 more years after he was seemingly not going to live longer. So this same thing, he lived 15 more years. That's great. And he gave his life to the Lord. I think it's interesting that they led him to the Lord and then prayed for him. That's great. So Lester got in with a bad crowd and dropped out of school at age 16. Shortly after, he began to have health problems and spit up blood. Wow. So he got in with a bad crowd, quit school, and then got sick. He was diagnosed with tuberculosis, a veritable death sentence. He continued to worsen and dropped to 93 pounds and became bedridden. Wow. Once more, his mother called her prayer warriors together to regularly pray for Lester. On his 17th birthday, the doctor declared he was about to die and even wrote out the death certificate. In the night, God gave Lester a vision. On one side of his bed was a coffin, and on the other side of the bed was a Bible. He was given a clear choice: either preach the gospel or die of tuberculosis that night. He decided to preach the gospel. Good choice, Lester. He was healed, and the next morning he ate food for the first time in a long time. And within 3 weeks had packed his bag to hit the evangelistic trail. All right. Wow, that's huge. That's awesome. It was a rough start. Lester had a fishing buddy who went along to be a song leader, hit the backwoods of the Deep South. They were unpolished and hard on people as Lester preached his messages. Something must have been working, because everywhere he went, he got a group big enough to start a church, and he would send to his denomination to send for a pastor for the new group. Hundreds were saved. Seeing his success, they ordained him. That's great. And it's funny because they said he was kind of like rough on people. He was kind of rough around the edges when he was first starting out. But if you guys know Lester, that didn't really change throughout his ministry. I'm sorry. In 1931, God began to deal with Lester's motives. He'd agreed to preach the gospel to save his life, but he didn't have a real concern for people. God gave him a vision of multitudes of people in foreign countries going to hell. God broke his heart for the lost that night. God called him to be an international evangelist and preach the gospel to the whole world. Wow. He was never the same again. 18 months later, God connected Lester with Howard Carter, an internationally known Bible teacher, and they began to travel the world together. They traveled to Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, Java, the Dutch East Indies, Tibet, Manchuria, Japan, Korea, Germany, Brazil, Bolivia, France, Spain, Portugal, and England. They would go to an area, and Howard would go to one place to preach, and Lester to another. Some remarkable healings and deliverances began to occur in Lester's meetings. People were being healed and saved by the thousands. During the war in the 1940s, Lester returned to the United States, Mexico, Central and South America. While in Argentina, Lester met another missionary named Louise Lehman. They hit it off and were married 2 years later. They began to minister as a couple in Cuba, Haiti, and Puerto Rico. At one point, Louise got malaria, but God healed her in answer to Lester's prayers. They continued on to Brazil, Argentina, Peru, Ecuador, Uruguay, and Panama. So lots of places in South America. They only slowed down when Betty found herself pregnant and they returned to the United States. God called the couple to set up a base in South Bend, Indiana, for the next few years. In 1950, God called the family to Manila in the Philippines. The work was tough going until a girl who was demon-possessed was making national news. Yeah, this was a really big deal. Really big deal. God asked Lester to pray for her. The deliverance and healing was so public and so dramatic that papers everywhere carried the story. Yeah, you can still find it online and everything. I think they might have even made a movie about it. Okay, it says the entire country became open to the gospel. Wow, because of this one deliverance, the entire country became open to the gospel. That's awesome. I still pray for stuff like that currently in other countries. China, I pray for that a lot, and like North Korea are the big ones. Okay, so he said he held revival meetings for 6 weeks, and the crowd was estimated one night at 60,000 people. Clifton Erickson came over from the United States to help in the meetings. 150,000 were saved over those weeks. A famous actor who couldn't walk was healed, which gave the group even more media attention. A lawyer who'd been on crutches for 12 years walked out holding them in his arms, totally healed. It's awesome. God called the family back to the United States in the 1960s to begin a pioneering television work. His preaching began to be heard all over the United States and the world. He also started a ministry to feed the starving worldwide after God gave him a vision, calling him to care for the dying. So as you can see, he did have several visions from the Lord. That's great. And he listened to those visions. That's the key. So it says he remained faithful to the visions God gave him and went home to be with the Lord on April 28th, 1996. So he lived a good, long life serving the Lord. He was just such a great man of God. I know he's really impacted so many people. I know Curry Blake nowadays, if you guys know Curry Blake, he was really affected by Lester. He counts him basically as his main mentor. So that's been really awesome. Lester Sumrall has a lot of really great stuff that you can access actually here on YouTube and other places, obviously. But he has this one seminar called the Demons and Deliverance Seminar. I found it really helpful. There's a lot of videos in it and a lot of information. Maybe I'll try to put that here in the link below. But he's a really great teacher. He's so encouraging. He does not mince words. He really knows his stuff. He traveled, I believe it was like to over 50 different countries, and he really just had such a heart for people, and he was called by God and he listened to the calling. So I hope you guys were encouraged by that, and as always, faith is a muscle, right? So we got to use it so we do not lose it. be encouraged, everyone. I just pray blessings on each one of you, that you each fulfill every single good plan and purpose that God has for you, and that you, even through this, receive some sort of vision or word from the Lord. Maybe He's been telling you to start some sort of ministry and you've been holding off. So here is your go-ahead to start serving the Lord in whatever way you can, and He will just really make those results even bigger and better than you could have imagined. Thank you all. Blessings on you, and we'll see you next time.